People who have worked at resorts, what's the most f***ed up thing you've seen? Was working at a golf resort, and some guys took some booze out on the course in their bags. Got too drunk. One guy didn't make it past the ladies' tee, so he had to do a streak through the pool area as punishment. It was packed with families. He ran through the terraced garden, and as he hit the bricks by the pool, he done the splits right on the corner of a brick. Sliced his ball bags open. One testicle dropped out. There's a lot of tubing in there. He tries to pick it all up, and he starts screaming. All the kids and moms start screaming. Helivac had to land on golf course. Pure chaos. Story 2. I worked at the Grand Canyon. There's a place right over the rim behind a photo studio called Kolb's Chair. It's just a small cave to sit and enjoy the view. It's a bit scary to get to, but one drunk guy decided to try. He ended up in the hospital via the helicopter that had to pluck him from the canyon. He made it, but it took him months of rehab. I was a waiter for the resorts in the Poconos, back when they were still a thing. I can't begin to tell you how many times guests would ask female staff for favors when we were doing food service delivery to their rooms. I got really good at setting the food down first, knocking and then booking it out before the door opened. Screw the tips. Story 3. I worked in Yellowstone National Park, which has a resort, so close enough, one summer for seasonal work. We had several deaths that year, drownings, falling off mountains, hikers getting lost, etc. But the worst was the kid who nearly died hot potting. If you don't know, Yellowstone has over 10,000 geothermal features with acidity ranging from neutral to battery acid. And hot potting is when you find a spring that you can chill in like a sauna. It's very common if you know which spring to go to. There was a group of kids who were hot potting and probably getting drunk, and one wandered off and ended up accidentally breaking through the thin crust and falling into a spring that was incredibly acidic. When this happens, the boiling water, coupled with the acidity, eats away at your skin immediately. His skin from the waist down sloughed off, and I mean everything. My colleague was the one who answered the ER call. He spent a very long time in critical care, and we were all really shocked and happy that he survived. Story 4. I worked at a hotel in Paso Robles that had private hot tubs outside every room, and we checked in a couple of squatters. They stayed holed up in the room for several weeks. When they figured out we were onto them and attempting to evict them, they smeared poop all over the walls. We had to call hazmat to clean it and remove all the carpet. Then, after that incident, it was the most popular and requested room, because it was all remodeled. Story 5. Mountain resort that catered to wealthy hunters. 2 rooms decided that walking to each other's rooms was too much of a hassle, so decided to smash a huge hole in the wall that separated them. Not even contrite about it. Stayed for 3 more days. And the resort was privately owned by a family. It wasn't some big chain. Story 6. A guy had split with his GF weeks before, checked into our hotel the day before Valentine's and sent her a message that he was in room 6X. And if she didn't show, he'd know it was over. She didn't show. He took action the next morning. He had brought a tool for undoing the safety catch on the window and used it before he jumped. The guy plunged 7 stories. Head hit the solid steel railing. While going through a glass roof veranda, he landed on a concrete footpath less than 2 meters from the glass walls of our restaurant, spraying blood and other bodily fluids up the side. By some miracle, he missed the pedestrians. The restaurant was packed with customers having a romantic Valentine's morning breakfast, some just on the other side of the glass. Many required trauma counseling afterwards. Story 7. When I was 18, I worked at a ski resort in Lake Tahoe, and there was a really sweet girl celebrating her 21st birthday. She came in and talked to all the staff, etc. Well, she got wasted, and for some reason her and her friends decided to, still drunk, ski. She slammed into a tree and died instantly. It was so sad. Story 8. As a very young man, too young. I used to work at a camping site in the south of Sweden for the midsummer festivals. There's probably not many f***ed up things that I haven't seen. They used to leave their vehicles upside down, burning when they left the premises. It looked like a war zone. It was a war zone. Story 9. Suicide attempts. Normally, they're discovered by housekeeping or the family. It happens surprisingly often, and usually by people with kids and family staying there too. We did have a HIV plus person come to stay for the sole intention of dying away from his family back home. It was pretty messed up because he was at the end of his life. Projectile vomiting and just a sad situation for him and all the people he involved in his death. Story 10. Worked at the canyons in Park City as a liftie for a winter. Worked the base lifts, including the gondola, and one day was working the top. At the lift across from the top of the gondola, Saddleback, I was randomly just watching midday as it calmed down and saw a woman and her kid hop on. Thought nothing of it, obviously. A few minutes later, the lift stops and doesn't start spinning for 15-20 minutes. During this time, a ton of patrollers on sleds came ripping up under the lift. Came to find out that the woman had a seizure on the way up, didn't have the bar down, and fell off and broke her neck. Died instantly while her kid watched. Patrollers got there as soon as they could, but nothing they could do. Will never forget helping the crying kid on the gondola to download with the patrollers. I am not epileptic or anything, but always put my bar down because of this now. Never know, man. Still think about it frequently during the winter, and it's been 10+ years. Story 11. While working on the receiving dock, we had an ambulance arrive. Resorts don't like negative publicity, especially regarding the health of patrons. So emergency vehicles are directed to come through the back of the house, as it is referred to at most casino resorts. 2 EMTs come in pushing a gurney, and they are gone maybe 20 mins before they come back with a body covered by a white sheet. The funny, gross part was that the body had an obvious erection poking up in the middle of the sheet. They chuckled when everybody stared at it and said that the victim died of a cocaine and Viagra overdose. Story 12. Old man out with a proper death. 65 years old. Wife rode him to death. Viagra and his heart didn't mix. Heard the whole story in the lobby as the crew upstairs radioed down to the chief on duty. Every single one of us guys lined up and saluted him on his way out on the stretcher. Was a 26E Army vet recently retired, but only us guys knew the real reason behind the salute. The wife wrote the resort thanking us guys for saluting her husband on his way out. Management patted us on the back for it. Story 13. La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club, 2006. I was part of the beach crew. I came upon a kid who had fallen while skimboarding and was bleeding on his face. Trophy wife mom was nearby as I called a paramedic on our radio. As we waited for the medic, I saw the shadow of a man walking up to us. I looked up and saw that he was wearing cowboy boots and jeans. Very strange for being at the waterline on the beach. Then I saw he had a pint glass full of whiskey, a half-buttoned shirt with a dragon on it, and crazy white hair blowing in the wind. That's when I recognized him as Bill from Kill Bill. Yes, it was David Carradine and his wife and her kids. He kind of shrugged and walked on. I didn't see him again until later that night when me and a couple colleagues had to physically carry him up the stairs to his room at the hotel next door because he was so drunk. Not terribly long after that, I learned he died, but I will never forget that encounter. Story 14. Worked at a ski resort for a year. Housemate tried to take advantage of a drunk girl. It's not blood or shit or tragic accidents. But until you actually see someone do this, and it's not just something you see on TV or read about or hear about secondhand, you can't fully understand just how fucked up and depraved it truly is. Edit. For anyone asking, wondering, yes, I stopped it from happening. It was at a small party at the apartment. He isolated her twice during the night outside. The second time, he'd convinced her to let him go to her place with her. Then came back in and pretended he needed to sleep because of an early work meeting the next day. I knew what he was up to when I saw him go outside with her the first time. I'm very good at reading people, odd situations, but he'd also pressured my friend into drinking when alone with him before, even though she said she didn't want any alcohol. I stayed outside to wait for our mutual friend to leave. I wanted a witness to him not actually going to sleep. Mutual friend and I talked, and I stalled until he came out of the apartment and was obviously shocked we were out there. But I played it off. Just as the mutual friend invited me to hang out at his place, the drunk girl drove up the road from driving her friends back down the mountain. I got into her car, and my housemate was already calling her after texting her a minute before. He was also magically right by the apartment, even though he told mutual friend and I he was going on a midnight walk. I asked the drunk girl if he was trying to hook up, and she said that she probably gave him the wrong impression, at which point I told her she was drunk and could give no one any impression. She and I made the 10-second drive to mutual friend's place, and our housemate bolted up the mountain. He was scared shitless when he got there, but I played it off and kept a close eye on him until the mutual disdain between us drove him to kick me out. When I discovered he'd inquired about an underage girl who worked at the resort hotel, as well as a barely legal co-worker of mine who was very petite and still had braces, I reported the things I'd seen and heard to his boss, told his girlfriend about his incessant infidelity, and let the landlord know about his numerous lease violations in an attempt to drive him away from the resort altogether. He got fired. The girlfriend stayed for a few months before they split. She hated me immediately afterwards, but seemed to be fine with me after the breakup, probably because she suffered the same narcissistic emotional abuse I did. And the landlord chose money over ethics. Our mutual friends either chose not to take a side or actively felt like what I did was wrong, though the two I thought I'd bonded with and swore up and down. They thought he was horrible, and I was the one they truly respected, kept hanging out with him, and wanted jack to do with me. One mutual friend, a woman, even told me that although he did try to rape her friend, it was her friend's fault for putting herself in that situation. My other friend has always admired my intelligence in that situation because most people wouldn't have picked up on it and something bad would have happened. That idea scares the shit out of me for any woman getting preyed on by a creep. I left a few months later. It taught me a lot about people. I regret nothing. Story 15. I worked at a ski resort, and employees weren't allowed to enter through the main doors, even if it was the most direct route to where we needed to be. We had to navigate tunnels under the main hotel, and pretty much memorize how many turns to take, as nothing was really marked. It always managed to unintentionally scare guests of the hotel as you'd suddenly exit from what looked like broom closets into main parts of the hotel. It felt pretty screwed up to not be treated as humans. I mean, the hotel has employees. Why the push to bed invisible in this mole-like fashion? I was a babysitter, so would usually get called into work evenings until like midnight, so the parents could go adult in the resort, child-free. The place had an unspoken policy to keep the kids away from most of the resort. If the parents took them places, nothing was said, of course. But us babysitters had instructions to basically keep the kids in only specific spots. My charges were so young, usually the parents just wanted someone to watch the kids in the hotel room the whole time. Make sure they go to bed by 8 rexed or whatever. Sometimes the parents had met order room service and encouraged me to get something too. As a poor local resident that never used the resort, this was a treat. During the day, the resort really tried to sell parents on leaving their kids at camp just to keep them away. Camp basically consisted of being kept in a separate building away from anything remotely fun, with us staff playing back-to-back movies or playing board games with the kids. I think one 20-minute break from camp was authorized, during which we were allowed to take the kids outside on a lawn of the resort. The kids would seek paddle boats and always want to use them. Sorry, no. Maybe you can ask your parents to take you. I always felt bad for the camp kids. They were super bored. We would try to entertain, but when camp lasts from like 7 a.m. 3:30, the kids basically felt like they were at school, with no educational component. During summer break, few wanted that. Story 16. I worked at a Sheraton, and there was some kind of dentist convention going on. They reserved a conference room for a medical device demonstration. A fellow worker told me to go up and check it out. There were tables arranged in a square, with human heads neatly arranged for, I guess, practicing some sort of new technology. Circa 1985. Story 17. Worked in hospitality for quite a few years, some of the most memorable. Guy jumped from the second story because he was locked out of his room, broke both ankles. He was highly intoxicated and there with a group for a convention. Wife called the hotel because she was worried husband was drinking and thought he would unalive himself. Found him at the bar, started talking to him, and he was plastered and worried I was going to tell his wife. I asked if he needed a hug. A 50-plus man cried into my shoulder with all of his coworkers around. He was okay. His wife called a couple days later and thanked me for being so kind. Husband and wife go to the resort for an anniversary weekend. Husband gets a text from the app's wife. All hell broke loose in the fine dining restaurant. Comes down to the front desk and continue arguing, able to de-escalate the situation, and booked her a separate room. Husband decided to check out of the hotel once the wife is sleeping in the middle of the night. Suspended her phone, cancelled all of her credit cards, took all of his things, and drove 4+ hours home. February 15th. Go into a room to clean it. One night stay. Walked into what I thought was chocolate syrup and strawberry syrup all over the bed. It was in fact not strawberry syrup, but a mix of chocolate syrup. Not chocolate syrup, something that kind of resembles strawberry syrup and lube. Found a whip and used toys in the bathroom and $100 with a sorry note on the desk. Company rented out a cottage at the resort and had security called a couple of times over noise complaints and being on the golf course after hours. Housekeeping goes in the following day to find 4 naked men and a woman passed out upside down on the couch. They all worked together, and she was the point of contact for the conference. The rock on her hand had to be at least 4 carats, and none were her husband. There was also a dude that died in a bathroom from a heart attack. Thankfully, it was a restroom that not many people frequented on the property. There was also a B-list celebrity that stole a golf cart while highly intoxicated. Got him to bring it back. He then tried to pay and convince me to go to his room for the night. He was a recovering alcoholic and had a 7 a.m. flight. Was able to get him to pull it together and make his flight. Called and apologized for his behavior a couple days later. Story 18. Worked as a rep in Gran Canaria for a couple of seasons. Over New Year, 2 of us were asked to go visit a guest in the capital's hospital. She'd been airlifted in from a neighboring island. Honestly, I can't remember why. This was 25 years ago. Appendix, possibly. Whatever it was. It was obviously bad. After a few days, hospital staff in broken English told her, "Your fiancé is coming in." She was so excited to see him. Grateful he'd been able to get over to visit. Turns out he was coming in his own air ambulance. He'd slipped on the hotel lobby's marble floor and hit his head, losing consciousness. He died 2 days later. That's when we were asked to visit. She was such a champ. We didn't know what to expect, but she was holding it together. Typical Englishwoman, worried about everyone else. Her only complaint/lament was that she didn't have her glasses. I remember thinking, Christ, all this, and you can't even see. I suspect she must have had a huge emotional crash somewhere down the line. I think of her often, and hope she's doing okay. Story 19. I worked at our local resort's golf course, maintaining the gardens for a season. The original cart girl, older woman, not too bad looking, but always extremely unfriendly to us other employees, kept disappearing for about an hour at a time. The ranger would come around and ask if anyone had seen her, and we'd say no, and that was it. A few weeks later, we all found out she was hooking on the course and getting guys to rent a room so they could go bang for an hour. The next cart girl was a lot cooler, but also not that cool, lol. Story 20. Trigger warning. Sexual assault probably going to get buried. But the worst thing I heard about was a couple who were bar managers would invite the young female bartenders over for after-work drinks. When they were over, they would drug them, have sex with them, and film it. Then they would blackmail them into giving them money to not realize the video. Eventually, multiple victims came forward, and they were arrested and charged. Both of the perpetrators took their own lives before the sentencing. The worst part about it is the victims were mostly young 18 to 20-year-olds, and lots of international people as well. Story 21. I worked at a historic hotel when I was on summer break from college, and I had to show a room to a guest that wasn't made up from a previous guest. We told them we wanted to show the room after it was made, but they insisted on seeing it because they had limited time. The room was a mess and had multiple used condoms on the bedside stand and floor. I walked in and threw a towel over one when I saw it and stood awkwardly over the one in the middle of the room as the guests looked around. Story 22. I never worked at a resort, but this is a resort-related story. I was up in Orlando visiting my brother and I got a call from a friend of mine in Hollywood, Florida. He was all excited, and I didn't understand what he said at first, so I had him repeat it, and he yells into the phone, "Dude, Anna Nicole Smith just died. I thought it was incredibly weird that he was calling me to tell me that Anna Nicole Smith had died. He was not the type of guy that paid a lot of attention to what celebrities did, and I didn't understand why he thought it was so noteworthy that he had to call me. I just said, "Okay." He said, "No, she just died. We were hanging out at the bar in the casino, and she said she wasn't feeling well and went upstairs about a half an hour ago. Her boyfriend just called from the room saying that she's dead." Evidently, he had been hanging out with her entourage at the Hard Rock Casino, and they kept partying at the bar when she went upstairs to lay down. He hadn't known her or any of her entourage previously, but I guess he ran into them at the casino and started hanging out with them. Story 23. I was working at a large resort property many years ago. We had a mentally ill younger male guest take a running dive off of a 125-foot-high building. He landed headfirst on the concrete at the edge of our pool deck on a busy Saturday afternoon. It looked like a Gallagher skit. We had to evacuate the deck and wait for the police to investigate and remove his body. Then we had to deal with cleanup. Very sad. His older parents had brought him on vacation. He had a history of mental illness and decided to end things when his parents were out having a late lunch. Story 24. This is what I heard from people at front desk. Then I walked in seeing the rest. So apparently, this couple was supposed to meet together in our hotel. Cancun assumed they were in a long-distance relationship because they were both arriving at different times. The guy checked in early and requested the staff to let him know if she arrived because he was decorating the hotel with flowers and romantic stuff and whatever. They said sure. And the dude gets to decorating. Around 5 hours later, I think around 10 p.m., girl still didn't show, so he was concerned and kept calling her. He ran to front desk and asked employees if they ever seen a girl, and they said no. He hung around front desk for another 2 hours, and he still didn't hear from her. He then ranted a bit to the staff that they fought on the phone before the flight and didn't think it was serious, but starting to think it was. He started drinking like a bastard. Around midnight now. He then started slurring and such, and ranted more to the staff like they are therapists. Staff genuinely felt bad and offered something to eat. He refused, and even started to tear up, and had his eyes attached to his phone. This is where I came in the beginning of my shift as security. I had to watch him for security reasons, but noticed on his phone that it looks like he was going through photos of multiple women with lingerie. He then abruptly left and went outside the front door for like 10 minutes and brought back a girl, except it wasn't his girl. Very certain it's an escort. Got even more awkward because out of happiness and relief, one of the staff members said pretty loud, "There she is, so happy she is safe." And the dude kind of gave him the "Nongren she cuts throatum" signal and went straight to his room. I mentioned to staff what I saw on his phone, so we concluded he definitely hired an escort. We all put our heads down and just continued to work. But the real kicker? His actual girlfriend finally showed up at 11 a.m. and said her flight was cancelled. Damn Spirit Airlines. And she forgot her phone charger at home. We had to call the cheating dude's room because he didn't seem to pick up her calls and looked really shocked when he came down. Girl was happy. Guy was still shocked, which confused the girl, and I overheard the guy say, "I will explain everything," as he was walking to his room. Escort already left, according to staff, thankfully, but man really unfortunate over miscommunication. Story 25. Witnessed a bartender piss in every glass of champagne for a single table at wedding. The guys at the table were from NJ slapping multiple banquet server bums, mine included, and being obnoxious asshats. Too much money would be risked to ask them to leave. Lots of presidents have stayed here, and it's been around longer than we've been a country. Story 26. I worked at a high-end boutique resort in Asia as a dive instructor. One night I was partying with the students after they graduated. I passed out naked and covered in barf while floating on a float in the pool. For some reason no one, that I remember, woke me up till the am. I was covered in mosquito bites, cold, hungover, and probably quite the shocking. Somehow I wasn't fired, but I've never touched Sambuca again. Story 27. worked at an upscale hotel. Some things I remember: there was a large banquet area with collapsible walls that created smaller meeting areas when the big space wasn't needed. A coworker pissed in the area where the collapsible wall would fold into, and it stunk for weeks. A guy got drunk at his company's event. While the upper executives were speaking, there was a loud thunk heard from the back of the room where the guy fell out of his chair. The entire room of 600 people heard and saw. The hotel promptly got him a wheelchair and a free room to sleep it off. My car was broken into in broad daylight. The guys that did it worked at the same hotel. They were found out an hour later when they tried to return the crowbar they borrowed from the maintenance department. Weeks later, they called me while I was working and told me to drop the charges, else they'd gun me down. Several people heard it all since the call was on a shared walkie-talkie. One event included smaller gatherings catered by the hotel in the guest rooms. I received a call that one of the rooms needed more drinks. When I arrived, I witnessed my male coworker dancing like a stripper on top of one of the tables. The group promptly grabbed me and cheered for me to do the same. We had a church group one Sunday. Spent all night setting up hundreds of chairs in neat rows. The next day when I walked in to check if they needed anything, I saw nothing but bodies rolling all over the floor and people speaking in tongues. The chairs were all stacked and moved out of the way. One event was Hawaiian luau themed, so they had a roasted pig for dinner. That thing was hideous to look at, but someone had to carve it on demand for the guests. One guest requested and was served its beehole. That's enough for now. Story 28. At a certain massive theme park that I can't name, here are some incidents. 1. Some people got together that had closed the restaurant in the park, got on the wheelchairs, and raced each other to the front of the park. And interestingly, it was learned that there were some places that were downhill. 2. Two of the costume characters fell in love. Late night after the park was closed, these two characters wearing their costumes were caught having kex. Everyone made fun of it on a daily basis for at least a year. Story 29. Heron Island, Australia. About a decade ago, whilst they were at work, management decided to raid about 85% of the staff for contraband furniture in their rooms. The general manager, assistant manager, HR person, and Jord for housekeeping personally went room to room, taking out all furniture that was above the provided single bed and chest of drawers. Chairs? Gone. Cupboards? Gone. Dressers? Gone. Tables? Gone. All broken up and thrown into skips. All of the possessions in said furniture were unceremoniously dumped in the middle of the room or on their verandas. Bear in mind, all of this furniture was private property. It had been passed down from staff members to staff members for decades. But the GM declared that anything that staff left on the island when leaving was now property of the resort, and that staff could not gift possessions to other staff. Then they fired a 19-year-old staff member who had been on the island a week, having moved from France to work there, for crying so loud that guests could hear it. 20% of the staff quit over the next month. A bunch of them all temporarily moved into one house in the nearby port town of Gladstone, trying to get retribution, but were sadly shut down on all fronts. The workplace ombudsman didn't care. The real estate tenancy authority saw it as too hard work to prosecute. Not even the media were interested, because Australian media are almost always on the side of big business against workers. Thankfully, none of those people are there anymore. But if you go to any island resort in Australia, remember to treat the staff super kindly. Resort staff in Australia are treated like absolute shit by their employers 24/7, and most of the time don't even get to enjoy any of the perks of working in those locations. Edit. Worth mentioning that all of those managers involved with this either left or were fired within 2 years of this happening. I don't know what current management is like, but the island is a wonderful place to visit if you get the opportunity. Story 30. I was at a beach resort about 10 years ago. I was chilling on the beach when suddenly a lady close to us started screaming and looking towards the ocean. Me and another guy ran to her, and she screamed that her son was out in the ocean and stuck in an undertow and kept going under. I looked out in the water to see a 9-10-year-old boy struggling hard to stay above water. Me and the guy ran into the water and was able to grab the kid. I carried him back onto the beach in my arms. He was scared and exhausted, but otherwise okay. When I got back to the beach, I was looking around for the mother who was screaming hysterically just moments before. I looked around and couldn't find her. I sat the boy down, and a nurse that happened to be present started checking him out. I kept looking around for the mother, and when I turned back towards the ocean, I saw her floating face down in about 3 feet of water. She had obviously followed us out into the water when I went after her son, but couldn't swim and drowned. I immediately went and grabbed the woman and pulled her onto the beach while 2 bystanders immediately started CPR, but it was too late. When I looked back towards the boy, he had stood up and was looking directly at his dead mother lying at my feet. I say she couldn't swim because I was later told that by a relative of the boy and mother who was inside their condo when all of this happened. Story 31. I did a season at Winter Park Ski Resort. I was on the facilities team and was in charge of keeping the resort cleanly, events set up as well as janitorial duties. One time, the main women's restroom backed up and flooded everywhere. It was bad enough that the maintenance team had to feed a tiny camera into the pipes to find the cause. After gawking at the camera, several of us hit the bathroom to clean up. It was gross. There was about 4 to 5 inches of standing sewage water that we had to squeegee and mop. Bits of shit and toilet paper floating around. If that wasn't bad enough, what really sticks with me is that I looked at the ground one more time and saw a lone corn kernel floating around in the abyss. Story 32. One summer in college, I worked at a fancy lodge in the mountains that had a big banquet hall with massive wooden tables. At the end of summer, we had to move the tables for a thorough floor cleaning, and when moving them back into their rows, a coworker got 4 of his fingers caught in between 2 tables. They looked like hot dogs that had been run over by a car. Story 33. It's not fucked up, but it's interesting. I was a kid working at Disney and was on register at a cafeteria. Some guy comes up to me and asks if I know where he can get Coke and that he would pay whatever. I happen to know all the Disney college program communities have a dealer that hangs at the gas station nearby every night at the same time. So I agree to get him a G for $200. I was nervous, 'cause I never sold Coke. Just a bit of weed to friends. I also take the bus to and from work, so I had to catch a bus late at night to meet him at his Disney hotel. He told me to go to the 3rd floor bathroom. He watched me go in from afar, and I took a piss. He walked in and started taking a piss in the urinal next to me, and we made the exchange. He seemed really content, and I thought it was the end of it, and I made a quick buck. He actually hit me up for more the same night while I was sleeping, and again, and again, and again, until I refused. 'Cause I was sick of the risk, and he had a meltdown over text. Luckily, his vacation must have ended sooner rather than later, because I stopped seeing him around very quickly. Story 34. Not a true resort, but did real estate development for a while in resort-style communities in Florida. Many have a program called Stay and Play, where you can listen to a sales pitch and pay a nominal fee to get a weekend in one of the model homes and a temporary membership to the country club. It's similar to the old timeshare free vacation if you listen to our sales pitch things. Some people have definitely figured out how to game the system and get essentially free vacations by stringing them together. Anyway, for my role, I visited multiple communities each week doing market research on sales figures, new floor plans, club membership rates, etc. for a marketing aggregate. I was regularly toured around the model homes and facilities. The sales associates would tell us all sorts of stories about finding the stay and play couples throwing these massive parties and trashing the place. Find them doing the dirty around the clubhouse facilities, or getting shit-faced and crashing their cars into existing residents' mailboxes. Story 35. So I wasn't there to see the whole thing, but a co-worker told me, so I work at Disney World in recreation, pool greeter, so I'm always at the pool area. My coordinator told me one day, a couple came into our resort, Riverside, to swim and drink, and they brought the kids along. Throughout the day, the parents are getting drunker and drunker until they start fighting and screaming at each other. Well, security and cops get called, and they started freaking out and flee. They forgot the kids, and one of the parents ended up at Old Key West, and the other at Disney Springs, where they got arrested. Lots of poop in the pools. Story 36. Like, first day? Absolutely. My first week, I watched a guy get fired for stealing from the kitchen. Owner himself walked out to the dude's car, grabbed the stuff he'd taken, walked it back inside. Housekeeper got fired after he disappeared for a while, but they found him on camera sneaking out to a van to hook up with his girlfriend. Middle-aged woman took 2 teen boys up to her room. The room overlooked one of our pools, and everybody knew their parents were not happy. My last month, walking out the employee entrance, I overhear a guest complaining that another guest at their birthday party has a gun and were afraid he'd use it. Got outside, called the desk. Desk called the cops. Happy birthday, kid. All in all, great year. Story 37. Used to work where the NXIVM cult had a conference. They rented the whole campus, brought their own Wi-Fi routers so they could spy on what everyone looked at, and wouldn't speak or look at most employees because we were parasites. I gave Kristen Kruk a double take because I didn't expect to see a celebrity on a random Tuesday. Never spoke a word to her. Because as soon as she saw me look her in the eye, she gave me the most vile, violated, atrocious, dirty look I've experienced before or since. Edited to add, they also followed Keith's vegetarian diet, and since they rented the whole campus, the dining hall couldn't cook or serve meat their whole stay to anyone. Story 38. This happened to my friend I was on vacation with. We were in Vegas at a hotel that's pyramid-shaped? Forgot name. Inside hotel. Each floor is essentially a different level of the pyramid, but open in the center. So outside our hotel room, there's a hallway and a railing that overlooks all the other floors. From the top floor railing to the first floor food court, etc. Our first night I didn't make it to the club, but my friend did. Later in the night, she decided to head back to the room. Got separated from her group. She ends up getting lost on the wrong pyramid floor, and while calling our friends, this strange man is standing 10 feet away from her against the railing, staring at her and making these weird noises. He starts coming closer to her, and she asks if he needs help. He doesn't respond and decides to sit on the railing, back facing where the drop is. She asks again if he's okay. He just stared at her with this very bizarre look, makes a gurgling noise, and while keeping eye contact, flips himself backwards over the railing, committing suicide right in front of her. To make matters worse, he landed on the bottom floor right near our friends who were late night eating Johnny Rockets. Apparently sounded like a gunshot. He fell from such a high height. Utterly horrific for all involved. Story 40. Worked in the kitchen of a resort, and I also managed the dining hall. We served food buffet style. Watched a mother let her kids attempt to serve themselves. Kid stuck his hand in a container of cheese and then dropped his tray of food all over the floor, and the mother said nothing about it. Had to find out myself. Story 41. Fun one? No poop, death, injury, or sexual assault. Early 1990s, working at a very nice hotel in California. And one morning, this random, very disheveled-looking fellow came in and approached the front desk. He started telling us loudly how it was the worst day of his life because his sled got stuck in the mud. It is the middle of summer in Marin County. There is no mud. There is never sledding. So we ask him if there is someone we can call for him. He says, "Yeah, my girlfriend," and gives us the phone number. So we call this lady and say that her boyfriend is up here at the hotel, and he is telling us he is stranded here. She immediately freaks out and starts asking if he looks like X, Y, and Z. Yep, that's him for sure. She says she doesn't even know this guy, and he has been stalking her. We get off the phone with her, and one person goes into the back and calls 911. Sheriffs show up very quickly because we are right next to the Marin County Civic Center, which also houses the jail, aka Blue Roof Inn. Turns out that guy had just been released from jail early that morning. He had been arrested and in jail for stalking and harassing that woman. Story 42. I worked at a small resort that had glass coffee tables. A teen girl sat on their glass coffee table, and at some point, the table broke. A very large piece stabbed her in the abdomen. Parents were there, thank goodness, but couldn't call correctly to 911. Had to dial 9 first. So they called me at the front desk. I then had to call 911, direct them to us, all while also calling the manager so he could get on site. It was a small property with under 50 units. So I was the only one on site aside from one maintenance guy. After I showed the EMTs where to go, I found the teen's brother, sitting in a corner, hugging his knees, just watching everything. He was so scared. I tried my best just to be there for him and talk him. Every time we go to a hotel and I see glass tables, I just think back to that day. She wasn't a big person. Tables were not old, just a freak accident. So please do not sit on glass tables. Story 43. I worked at a rooftop, rotating restaurant near SeaTac Airport. On my third day, I was bussing a table and looked out the window at a high-rise apartment building a half-mile away. There were flames visible on the balcony, and they were growing. They appeared to be involving the apartment above. I yelled to my boss, and the two of us raced down to the first floor, after directing one of the servers to call 911. As we ran down the street toward the fire, it became apparent that what we were seeing was a hibachi that some guy was firing up. As we slowed to a slow walk, we heard the fire trucks in the distance. Story 44. Worked front desk at a resort heavily marketed to couples. A good amount of domestic violence that still fucks me up to think about, but one of the weirdest things was a man who broke another guest's car window with his hand, because the love of his life was a kex worker who he took to our resort to propose to. He shot his shot. She turned him down by flushing the ring down the toilet, and he lost it and took it out of the nearby cars. Thankfully, the only real damage done to a human was the man's hand. But the woman was fine, and the man was handily, returned to the mental health clinic he had just left. Several co-workers told me they found out he escaped, but I never verified it, so I take the grand escape theory with a grain of salt. It's not the most depressing one. That would be the domestic violence ones, but it's the one that has stuck with me years later, probably because I was the one who he asked for help with his heavily broken and bleeding hand before any of us knew what went down. Story 45. I worked at a small resort as a kid. Family business. It was in a little village, and sometimes the water would go off. We had a backup, but it had to be switched on manually. I was in the office, and one of our guests came in and told me the water was off. Sure, no problem. I'll turn it on right now. Before I could leave to do that, another couple who was staying there came in, extremely pissed off. What kind of shitty place are you running here? We haven't bathed in 3 days. The first guy turned slowly to him and replied, "The water's only been off for about an hour." Story 46. I keep rewriting this comment with a story. Then I delete it and go, no wait, there was this story. Then I delete that comment, and I think of something even more fucked up. All of it can be summed up into one word: trafficking. The amount of trafficking that happens in hotels, whether it be drug trafficking, labor trafficking, kex trafficking, it is happening in every single hotel, no matter what tier. I don't care how much you spent. I don't care how hoity-toity the resort is. There is no amount of money that you can spend that will distance you from trafficking. It happens at every hotel, whether it's a Motel 6, whether it's a big box Marriott, whether it's the breakers. The good news is that a lot of hotel management orgs are cracking down on trafficking. These days, there is an effort to educate hospitality workers on what the signs are. Unfortunately, sometimes there are no signs. But they are doing what they can if you're a front desk agent or hotel staff in general, and you're aware of human trafficking happening at the property but fail to report it. You can be held legally accountable. Story 47. Worked valet at a hotel resort. We had a local guy come in like 3 times a week to get sucked off by random call girls. The f***ed up part was seeing him show up for dinner regularly with his wife and children. I had to listen to that guy spout bees of how much he loved his wife. XT. He was an ass when they weren't around. She was the nicest person in the world. Wanted to call him out so bad, but unfortunately, discretion is a big part of our job. Story 48. Okay, this blew up in an unexpected manner. Jesus. I have a few stories, but none as extreme as this. First one. About a month into my job, we had a shootout at the resort between some gang members, and the whole place went into lockdown just as my shift ended. Had to stay over for a few hours until an all clear was called, but we did get paid overtime for it, so that was kinda nice. Second one. Around Easter, we had a guy dressed as the dancing bunny, I don't know either, try to touch a bunch of kids. Cops got called and he was escorted away fairly quick. Third one. Full-on brawl happened in the water park area. 2 people were hospitalized, 1 was arrested. Pretty sure someone got brain damage. Story 49. A flight attendant cooked up a raccoon to make raccoon curry in her hotel room bathtub. I just found the aftermath, so I don't know what the thought process was, but there was clearly a raccoon that had been gutted and the meat was cooked, but she somehow got the fur all into the meat and could not get all of it back off, so she just threw it, fur and all, into the rest of the curry mix, which for some reason she was mixing in the bathtub. I guess that sort of makes sense since there were no pots in the room. But then how would you cook it once in the bathtub? IDK how much she ate, but she left the rest for me to find. The hotel owner showed up for the first time to come look at it. I'd never met the owner before that day, and I never saw him again after. My manager told me that the owner charged her airline extra money because of biohazard materials cleanup. Story 50. Worked at one in Vegas one night. Two guys wearing purge-style masks surrounded my maintenance guy doing circles on BMX-style bikes at 2 a.m. They had katanas on their back. He said, "I have kids, and I'm not going to go easy on you." They looked at each other and rode off. Another night, Dad and Mom wanted some action, left kiddos unattended in our pool. Kids' float went upside down, with kids stuck inside. Someone on their second-floor balcony jumped a good 3 yards out over our gate, hit the ground hard, and rolled his body into the pool, and saved the kiddo. No CPR was needed. Medics came transported. 90% the couple got charged for neglect. Can't confirm just what security told me, which he got for the officers. The hero got a few weeks stay. He had some minor juries from his jump. Story 51. Was pulling a double, and I ended my night riding around with the third shift night watch guy. So us, flashlights, golf cart, and a few beers. We cruise through the parking lot and see a car in the employee lot rocking. So feeling like assholes, we decide to bust them. Yeah, one of the housekeeping staff fucking the underage daughter of a guest. She was maybe 14, so parents are tracked down. Cops called. Owner of resort called. It was a shitstorm until morning. I ended up staying the night after giving a statement. I truly thought the owner was going to let that dad beat that kid to death. They were obviously reimbursed, and who knows what else. I saw true fear in that dude's eyes. It sunk in quick how badly be fucked up. Story 52. My airy lodge in the Poconos. It's now closed but reborn as a casino. They had honeymoon suites, the type that had heart-shaped hot tubs and a newly built pool with a glass wall overlooking the golf course. Couple in the pool swimming when the glass wall fell. It was sealed poorly. Couple had some cuts but no serious damage. I don't know how much the settlement was. Story 53. I worked as a room service for years since college. My subject was restaurant and hotel services. Well, one day there was a couple who rent a double bed with beachside view for 2 nights. At first night, everything went smoothly, but when the second night came, I have this beautiful lady showed up at my counter, shoved me about $200 and a picture, then asked, "Have you seen these two?" Well, at this moment, I knew this lady was finding her husband while he was having an affair. Due to policy, I have to decline. In one hand, I carefully shoved the key to their room, while the other hand taking the money. It wasn't long till we heard screaming and glass-shattering noises coming from upstairs. The girl was completely naked, dragged along the hallway while the man was standing deadly in the eyes, in the same condition. The place got shut down days later and I lost my job, but I'm happy doing something good. Story 54. I was working valet at a hotel in a wealthy part of Orange County, CA, one night around 8 p.m. on a weekend, which was a pretty busy time for us since our restaurant was sought after. An escort came out looking for her ride. She tripped, fell, and spilled an entire bag of toys across the front entryway. When I say an entire bag of toys, I mean there were things that still to this day, I have no idea what purpose they served. These items sprawled about 30 ft, bouncing, rolling, making sounds, falling apart. It was insane having myself and my colleagues try to chase down all these things while families, romantic dates, people on vacation, and day visitors watched this happen. We were picking things up without knowing where they've been or what they did or who they did them to. We had a few high-profile hotel guests that weekend as well. Story 55. Worked at a Great Wolf Lodge during COVID. Mask requirements, and plexiglass everywhere. Was working in the candy store. was a big scoop into bag then pay-by-weight place. COVID policy meant that I had to scoop the candy for them. Several times, kids would just open the lid and grab with their hands. Every time we had to take and throw the whole bin out. This one woman walked in with 5 loose children in tow. Oldest was maybe 10 and youngest in a stroller. I gave them my spiel, and they immediately disregarded it and went grabbing in the bins. We had to throw like 4 bins out, and the kids got upset because they wanted that candy. Mom gets mad at me, the teenage sole employee in the store, for not having locks on all the bins. Had to call a manager to get her to stop yelling over her kids crying about the candy. Story 56. There was a guy who was agitated from the moment he set foot on the property. He had a bunch of requests and wasn't happy about anything. At some point, he came storming up to the desk because apparently a housekeeper opened his room door. Waking up his infant, he threatened to climb over the desk and strangle my colleague. Same man was at breakfast on the patio. I don't know what he was doing or saying leading up to this, but he left to use the restroom. Another guest, a little old lady, leaned over to his wife and told her she should divorce him. She told her husband what happened, and he came to the desk to complain. He told us we need to get a hold of our other guests and kick them off the property. He left his vacation early. Dude owned multiple businesses in New York. Something about penny loafers. Story 57. Worked as a risk manager at a hotel. A couple was staying in a room on the first floor. The girl was pretty far along in her pregnancy. They had been doing drugs and then started arguing when she saw some texts from another woman. She decided to take a bath. His drug-addled mind thought she was trying to kill the baby. He attacked her, slowly tortured her with a knife. Cops were called, but he wouldn't let them in. She was screaming. They couldn't get in fast enough, and he stabbed her to death. Took 3 tasers to take him down. They both had cocaine, PCP, and marijuana in their systems. Her family sued the hotel, said the unarmed resort security guard should have busted into the room. Story 58. I work the early morning shift at coffee shop inside large hotel. One morning I came in to open at 4:30 a.m. and I'm still half asleep. See a fat naked man come running around the corner and get in the elevator. I couldn't believe my eyes. About 30 seconds later, 2 cops run around the corner and say, "Hey, did you see a guy running this way?" I just started cracking up laughing and pointed to the elevator. Couldn't get a word out. Story 59. Worked at a casino resort. People will leave their children in the car, babies included, walk inside, get to the roulette table, plus other table games OBVs, and proceed to order multiple alcoholic drinks over many hours until someone tells security when they see the kids and we had to track them down. Only for security to just scowl at them and not do shit about it. Gamblers are scum of the earth. Story 60. Younger guy, maybe 21, drank a bottle of tequila and decided to dive into what he thought was a pool, but it was actually just a shallow fountain. Split his head and face down the middle like it had a skin zipper. This same kid had broken a beer bottle in the hot tub earlier that day and needed stitches in his foot. The first stitches were done by the resort call-in doctor and looked all right, but the second ones to his face and head were done by a pharmacist's wife in the middle of the night and basically left him looking like Sloth from the Goonies. Story 61. Not me, but a family member worked on an Australian island off the east coast. After a group of Chinese visitors stayed over the weekend, they noticed there were white feathers in the hotel room kettles. This island is known for cockatoos wreaking havoc around the island and in the hotel rooms, so they must have been catching the birds and boiling them. All the kettles across the resort had to be thrown out and replaced.
The story ceased.
I think the worst thing was the sheer amount of cheating. Super high-end resort. The phone calls coming in from wives looking at credit card bills and demanding to know what, when, who. Our billing department having the utmost privacy, but always having to be honest that it was a hotel in XX romantic city, not the convention where they said they were. We also had a computer system full of notes because the men would bring multiple cheat partners and their wives. So notes about who was who not to say welcome back to, no references to prior trips, etc. So sad to be complicit in that. Story 63. More heartbreaking than fucked up. But my first job at a casino resort on the Strip, I noticed an older couple, 60. Something sat at the same table in the food court for days. The wife would cry almost uncontrollably, and the husband would berate her while he argued with someone on the phone. Found out later from a coworker that the husband lost the $4,000 they came to town with their first night at the tables. They didn't have enough money to get home, and their relatives didn't either. I quit before they left, though, so I have no idea what happened to them. I've always wondered. Story 64. I worked at a local theme park last summer. The park was open until midnight for the annual super busy event that was going on that weekend, and it was a family-friendly event. While I was working at the popcorn stand near the Ferris wheel, a group of cops walked past the stand with two naked guys in cuffs. Apparently, they were having keks on the Ferris wheel. There were plenty of angry parents that night. Story 65. We had a guy book a month in one of our premier rooms. He was a Super Gold Elite or whatever member. He put the no housekeeping sign on the door and closed all the blinds. When his reservation was finally over, housekeeping tried entering, but he had barricaded the door. I went in by basically breaking the door and found that he had hanged himself and killed his 9YO daughter in the room. So much for my fun summer job. I can't get the visual or the smell out of my head, ever. Story 66. I live at my wife's family's resort, and we had a couple men drown when they flipped their canoe. Neither had a life vest, and one guy couldn't swim. He pulled the other guy down trying to save him. They both died and stayed under for 10 or 15 minutes before TGE dive team could find them and the canoe. The rule at the resort has always been to use life vests, and neither of them had one on. They are strict about it now. Also, the owner pulled off all the canoes, and there are only a handful of John boats about. Story 67. Worked at a Disney hotel for a bit. Wealthy Brazilian families would send their teenage kids, usually around ages 14-18, in large groups to literally stay at the resort for a month and go to the parks every day. It was an experience. Holes punched in walls, broken TVs. Some kids decided to have a cake fight in their room, literally smeared cake into every surface. Walls, bedding, carpet, you name it. Another teen literally dropped his pants and took a shit by the pool, just straight up dookied on the path by the water. Story 68. Lifty at a ski resort. I was checking tickets, while a coworker was loading folks into chairs around a corner, just out of sight. Peeked my head around when I heard the lift stop and folks screaming. Just in time to see a dad lose grip on his son who never got in the seat properly and dropped roughly 35 feet to the ground. Kid luckily ended up being totally fine and even walked under his own power with patrol to the medical offices. Story 69. Crazy lady came in, writing notes on $100 bills and giving it away, as she was sure the world was ending. She went missing for a few days, which we then took the time to look in her suitcase to try and get a hold of her. She had images of angels of death and weird crystals. Days later, the police found her on the side of the road and sent her to the mental hospital. Story 70. I work overnights, and as I was walking the property one night, I heard somebody moaning in pain. Turned out it was an elderly woman with dementia, who had wandered out of her villa in the middle of the night and fell into a ditch. Her face was covered in blood, and it was December in Arizona, so probably 35-40 degrees. Paramedics came and took her to the hospital, and fortunately, she wasn't seriously injured. I still feel bad about it, because I have no idea how long she was out there. Story 71. Worked as security and was driving a drunk woman home. Before we left the resort, she started punching my coworker in the head from the back seat. I stopped the car, and we both jumped out. Once she figured out how to get herself out of the car, she tore all of her clothes off and started aggressively masturbating at us. Called the cops to come deal with it. She almost got herself tasered. Pretty wild. Story 72. I worked at a resort in Alaska for 2 years and was constantly amazed at people who couldn't do anything for themselves. It wasn't really that they were lazy. They were just so used to having other people go stuff for them. They didn't know how to take the initiative. They were helpless in the simplest of situations. Story 73. The female toilets poolside of an island resort after the Saturday night party boats from the mainland have left. Tampons, pads, piss and shit mixed with vomit on the walls, floors, mirrors, and sinks. Cleaner needed help, so we literally threw buckets of disinfectant all around the space, then got the fire hose to clean it. Took 3 hours, and we swear we could still smell it. Story 74. I worked at the golf course, and a group of parents got so drunk they lost sight of their kids. To be clear, this was at dusk for a party on the 18th green. There was a huge water hazard on this particular hole. A 3-year-old found it and drowned. I hope I never hear the type of screams like the ones I heard on that day. Story 75. I worked in a fairly nice resort where we would host a lot of teams. There was a big stadium venue nearby, so youth teams would come down and often turn the trip into a family vacation. We saw more weird stuff those weekends than any other times. Lots of cheating, wife swapping, parties, nudity, public indecency, you name it. I always felt so bad for the managers and security who had to deal with the entitled parents. Story 76. One time at the resort I worked at, I caught a guest trying to sneak into a restricted area where the staff keeps all the cleaning supplies. When I asked him what he was doing there, he admitted he was trying to steal some bleach to use in a prank on another guest. It was definitely one of the weirdest and most messed up things I've seen while working there. Story 77. I've worked in some pretty respectable resorts. Not gonna say the name for liability reasons, but I once saw a dude who was on some psychedelic jump from the 4th floor into the middle of the lobby. There was a spot by the lobby where you could see all the way up to the 4th floor from inside. He lived too. It was pretty nasty. The place rhymes with straight wolf dodge.